Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, November 19th, 2024, and today we are going to talk slugs, information overloads, and what to do now to prepare for then. And by then I mean spring. So let's do it. Well, the tree plantings have started. I got my first trees in on Sunday, then finished up my plantings of that particular planting on Monday afternoon. I've got my spreadsheet rocking with locations, names, varieties, date, planted, and etc. I will also keep track of any amendments I use throughout the course of the trees' lives, and that will make it possible to do a few comparisons over time, but of course also certify them organically one day if need be. I normally wouldn't work on a Sunday, but it was t-shirt weather again, and the two preceding days had been mostly indoors, and I'm going to take all the t-shirt weather days I can in November, although it seems to be most of them so far. There's just a feeling about putting trees in the ground as well that I can't be rivaled with planting vegetables or doing much of anything else. Planting trees is an incredibly satisfying way to spend an afternoon. And then I watched the NWSL semifinals, which was a nice punctuation. Marta's a legend. Anyway, with the conference season upon us, I've been thinking a lot about information. Specifically, I've been thinking about how people are increasingly telling me that they are confused and overwhelmed by all the information out there about how to farm and wind up in a paralysis by analysis state where it isn't clear how they should be proceeding. This is an interesting problem to have because when I was first starting in this business, it was the opposite. In 2009, YouTube was nascent and thin on farmers. This was before masterclasses, TikTok, and Instagram, or simply the number of books we have now. It was basically Elliot Coleman's The New Organic Grower, and that was it. Maybe there was like a couple forums. There was definitely no information on no-till market gardening. I mean, that is to say, like, obviously history. There's a lot of information on how to do this, but there's no information about how to do this in the modern economy. In fact, someone at the seminar where I was on Saturday had mentioned that one of the challenging things about farming information right now is that a lot of the talking heads, which would include myself, often contradict one another with their information. Like maybe one person says that it's okay to till the soil to start a garden, like I believe, but another says that they would never do that, which others believe. The reality is that both approaches can work. The person who believes people don't need to till to start a garden has probably had success piling compost onto land and then farming it the next season. That's totally fine because it is possible. I have farmed several different types of properties and seen it work and fail. So because I've seen that never till approach fail for many years, to stick with that example, I'm more likely to recommend a one-time tillage, especially when the native soil is in less than ideal conditions, like compacted or deplete or whatever. But this isn't a conversation about that. This is a conversation about, as a new grower, when you have two experienced gardeners telling you two opposing things, it has to be difficult to know how to proceed, to know which one is right. What you'll often hear, somewhat frustratingly, is that context is everything in farming, and it is. Your soil type, your climate, your available growing materials. One cannot properly tell you how to farm without knowing a lot of information about where you are, and what works on my farm, for instance, will not necessarily work on another because the contexts are just inherently different. Another way context comes into play is that you need your own experience to give you context with which to evaluate information. Like, I can tell you how to grow a radish, but until you've done it yourself, it's really hard to understand the nuances of soil, of seeders, of weather, and so on. Once you've actually tried to grow your own radishes, however, then hearing someone explain how that person grows them will be profoundly more helpful. Does that make sense? So because you've actually experienced the growing process of radishes, when somebody says, this is how I do it, you may be like, oh, I could tweak this or that little thing to make my process better. Of course, that doesn't ring true for every single person, but I would venture to say that for most of us, having some experience in something helps us to learn better from others. In some ways, it may not be an overabundance of information, but a dearth of experience that is the challenge right now. Because information is in abundance, but access to experiencing a farm or even a garden is not so much. Once you have even a small amount of experience, then you have the tools to decipher what information is and is not relevant to you. But if you can't access the experience, then the information is just going to feel overwhelming. Again, I don't speak for everyone, but people in the market garden industry are obviously not so much overwhelmed with the amount of information available right now. There is a lot to sift through, certainly, but again, it's easier to tell what makes sense for you when you have a small amount of experience with growing a certain vegetable or a certain crop. So I guess my advice to younger and newer growers who are feeling overwhelmed by all this information is to seek out less information and seek out a little bit more experience. I'm definitely not suggesting diving right in and buying some farmland. Definitely not that. Rather, I'm suggesting you help a farmer, maybe try to grow a garden, grow some mushrooms or some microgreens, or even just a potted plant. Having some experience trying to manage photosynthesis will put you way ahead and kind of help you filter some of that complex information that's just kind of flooding your Instagram or your podcast feed or whatever. If this sort of paralysis by analysis is what you're going through, maybe pick a couple people to follow and limit the number of sources you use. Sure, start there. But more importantly, really focus on finding ways to get your hands in the soil as much as possible so that information will make more sense, which I recognize can be difficult. To me, the dearth of experiential opportunities, places where you can actually just go farm and experience it, the amount of those opportunities has not at all kept up with the boom in information, because providing information is just easier. Even for me, I don't at present offer any way for people to learn to farm in person. And that frankly won't change anytime soon because I just don't have the time to invest in it. And I can do this when it's dark outside and I can't do that when it's dark outside. And that's sad because nothing will weed out the information that you do and don't need quite like experience. Like the first book I ever owned was Elliot Coleman's New Organic Grower. And I must confess, I really struggled to make sense of it at first because I wasn't yet farming when I bought it. That's funny to me now when I flip through that book because it's all good information, but it's pretty basic stuff. But it wasn't the book that taught me to farm. It was the farming itself. It was the mentors I've had. It was the experience. A book or a YouTube video or a TikTok is a complement to your experience. It enriches and refines it, but it cannot create the experience. Only your body can do that. Obviously, not everyone can go out and just get started, but hopefully you can find some way to get your hands dirty and start gaining that experience, even if it's just growing some basil plants in your windowsill, like I did in New York, and I failed. And that was my first growing experience. We don't have to talk about that. But it did help me have some context of what it took to take care of a plant. Anyway, not sure if that's helpful in the least or interesting, but that's where my brain is at today. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk slugs. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and would like to see it continue indefinitely, you can help to do that by going over to patreon.com/no-till-growers and signing up. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's question comes from Patreon member Joe, who writes, quote, "I help run a community garden that donates all of our produce to the local food bank. This year we had a lot of trouble with snails and slugs. The garden is up the bank from a river, so this problem won't be going away anytime soon. Do you have any tips or tricks to help keep them out, or at least reduce the amount that we have?" End quote. All right, thanks, Joe. I did discuss slugs a bit in the second episode of the show, but I grouped them in with other pests, so let's go a bit more in depth on slugs and snails. First, without knowing the size of your operation, there are a few things that you can more easily do on a small scale than a large scale. Managing slugs and snails in a highly mollusk-prone area is about making the environment less hospitable. These are pests that love cool, moist areas, so it's important to keep the leaves of growing plants as dry as possible throughout the day by using drip irrigation versus overhead. I've read suggestions like laying out lime or salt around the gardens like a slug deterrent moat, but I'm not sure that is feasible unless you're on a really small scale and in a dry climate where those things won't wash away or just get kind of mucky from dew. They don't like to climb over those, so that's how it's effective. But anyway, I also wouldn't want to surround plants with minerals like those, as it may throw off the soil health. So if you did do the protectant moat of sorts, it would likely have to be away from the garden soil as much as possible. Snails and slugs also love debris, so if you have a lot of leaves or wood chips near the plants, you may effectively be protecting the slugs. Of course, the slugs may likewise be helping to decompose those things for you, so there is some mutualism going on there, which I'm sure is not super reassuring, but it is technically true. Slugs and snails do benefit the gardens, but they also obviously benefit themselves a little bit by eating your gardens. Bit of a complicated relationship. In terms of predators, frogs, turtles, and snakes are good. Unless you're in an orchard, ducks and chickens are not the answer. I'm sorry. I know that phrase, you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency, is fun to say, but ducks won't just tear up your crops. They will also cause a food safety nightmare. Frogs, snakes, and turtles then are the better option. I mean, wild ones, obviously, though if someone is taking their pet turtle out to the garden every day to let it roam and help do some pest management, I'm not judging, and I'm also I'd like to see some photos. As for traps, I think slug traps is probably your best management option for just keeping populations low. There are two that are generally recommended. One that would be a board laid flat against the soil in the morning. Pick up the board and scrape the slugs / snails into a bucket with soapy water. Or two, half bury, like a few inches deep, a cup of water with some yeast or beer in it. Then dump the dead, drunk snails the next day into your compost or feed them to your chickens or whatever. That will help keep populations down. I like the beer trap just set inside of a live trap, as I've mentioned this before, but that just keeps bigger critters from joining the party. So yes, a small cup of beer set inside of a closed live trap. That's what I'm talking about. Your neighbors will think you're nuts, but of course that's how you know you're doing it right, when your neighbors think you're out of your mind. Again, healthy soil certainly can help plants, help give plants everything they need to protect themselves from pests, but sometimes the plants need a chance to get to that point. Otherwise, for acute slug and snail issues, you can use organically approved biological treatments like Sluggo, but perhaps start with deterring them first and see how far that gets you. Anyway, thanks for the great question, Joe, and of course, I will share more on slug management and pest management in general as time goes on. All right, going to take a quick break, and when we come back, what can we be doing now to make next year better? Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. One of the things I love about doing a daily show is that I can talk about timely things. The weird thing about doing this show in the winter, however, is that there isn't a ton of those timely things going on in terms of gardening. Or is there? Sorry, that was the best lead I could come up with. But yes, there is actually quite a lot to do now, heading into the winter and ultimately into the spring. For us, we are less than 2 months away from starting our first spring crops, which in our case is onions. And so we have to get a move on to get everything ready for that. I already did an episode talking about putting our beds to bed for the winter. In this segment, let's talk about some of the other things that you can do. Obviously, there are some perennials that can go in the ground right now, like many of my trees. Some folks even plant strawberries in the fall, though it may be a bit late for that here unless they're going into a tunnel. So I'm not really going to talk a lot about planting. Not every nursery is even selling right now, so that may be difficult to find plants especially in the northern climates. It may be too late anyway, and by too late I mean too cold and wet. So you'll have to wait until the spring either way. The thing that I'm really focused on right now is planning. Lots and lots of planning, but not just garden planning. I think one thing I know that I have neglected a ton over the years is having a good system for record keeping in place before the season starts. As my mentor Eric Smith used to say, it's hard to work on a moving train. So for us, while our train, i.e. our farm, is in the proverbial station, it's a good time to work on the tracking systems. So effectively, I'm planning for the planning. For instance, all of my little trials will need individualized spreadsheets that account for what I am tracking for that specific trial. Making those in the heat of the season, though, is, well, the reason I don't have as much data as I'd like to have. The easily accessible spreadsheets just don't get made when you're in the middle of the season. We will definitely do some crop planning shows to talk more in depth about how to plan based on your markets. Meaning when I'm crop planning, I like to work backward from what I hope to have that week. And then that gives me an idea of when I need to plant what based on the season. Of course, if you don't have a ton of growing experience, this is where those spreadsheets will come in extremely handy. You need to be able to track how long it takes to grow X crop from start to finish based on the time of year, so you can more easily plug that into your crop plan later. Some other in-the-field things you can be working on now are things like cleanup. Stop stepping over the stuff that you've been stepping over all summer, Jesse. Assuming all of you are named Jesse. I don't know that for sure. I have at least a couple Susans. Yesterday, I stopped what I was doing, which was planting trees, upwards of 10 times to start getting some of the weights I used for row covers and tarps out of the fields before they get consumed by cover crops or by purple nettle, which is, seems to be my soil's favorite thing right now. And they disappear until the spring when my mower finds them, which is incredibly low on my enjoyable activity chart. Making compost and finding compost ingredients for many of us is a good winter activity. I love composting in the fall and winter and letting that cure until the spring. Leaves are in abundance here right now. If you live in a deciduous forest, it's probably the same thing for you. And you can spend some time tracking that sort of stuff down. Building out some ecological areas as well, getting some birdhouses up and or cleaning out the ones that you already have. Obviously, I don't want to add too much to your winter lists, which I'm sure are already full. Sometimes just resting is fine too, but I know I like a full list so that I'm never wondering what I should be doing. Also, you should probably add Fargo Season 5 to the list. It's a masterpiece. Anyway, if you take one thing from this section, it's getting the spreadsheets ready this winter so you can just open them up on your phone. I use Google Sheets and start plugging in data in the spring and summer while it's coming in. What off the beaten path tasks are on your winter to-do list? Be curious to know. Let me know. And also, one great way to let me know things is through the super thanks button on YouTube, if that is indeed where you are absorbing these rants. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No Till Growers for their support. Biggest thank you ever to our Patreon members at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, let's see what we got. We got nothing. I did not pull it up. Oh, we got our weeklies. Our weeklies are back. So actually, the weeklies have a new joiner. So our weeklies are, to remind you, Stephen Smith and Byron Green and Maina is our new joiner. In this week's episode, they have been tasked with going and breaking up a nerdy artist enclave in Buffalo. But when they get there, they find that they are all very adroit at sculpture, and they kind of change their lives. Thanks you all for listening and or watching. We will see you tomorrow. Bye.